Okay, so hello everybody, and I'm very happy to welcome you to our fifth and final session of this semester Semiosalong series, Synechia. So today we have two presenters. We will have Jeremy Sherman and Vit Kvodiak. I'm sorry. And well, as usual, we will have presentations and then some questions and then presentation and then more questions. So yeah, and we are recording, as you can see, so let us know if you don't want to be recorded. You can write your questions at any time in the chat. Or at the end you can just open your microphone and ask our presenters. Our first presenter today is Jeremy Sherman, and well, I think again most of us in the biosemiotics community already know Jeremy, and also probably some of us in Tartu, because he was here just some few years ago, some summers ago, I think in 2019 or 2018 maybe. Jeremy, he has a PhD in evolutionary epistemology. He has been working for a long time with Professor Terrence Deacon, and today he's going to talk to us about the semiotic grounding problem, biosemiotics hardly addressed problem, and how to tackle it scientifically. So, Jeremy, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Does it come through?
Yes.
Good. Here comes. I'm going to screen share, but I would encourage people to do something you may not have done with Zoom before, which is you can split the screen, so you can see my mug and my presentation at the same time. That is, you can see my face. I just think it would be a little more human if we did that with the presentations in general. It's a nice effect, and you can do it. How is it done? How do you do it, Israel? What's the trick?
So on the right top corner of the Zoom, there is this button that says View. And there, once you are sharing your screen, there you can go into split screen mode. And then you will have on one side of the screen the presentation, and on the other side the presenter. So yes.
And you can slide there's a divider between them, and you can slide them in both directions. So you've already gained something from my presentation, a new technique for presentations in general. So I would probably have changed the subtitle for this presentation. I'm trying to be careful with my tone here, because in a way, what I want to present today is not within biosemiotics, but about it, about how we do it. It's about biosemiotic methodology. And in a way, it's an eye poke. That is, I'm trying to say there's something we're overlooking that may be useful for gaining more traction with biosemiotics in the larger sphere of research. This is inchoate. This is an idea that's come to me. I've worked with Terry now for 25 years. I came to biosemiotics through my work with Terry, and I have no doubt read less of the academic writings in biosemiotics than any of you attending, especially those of you who are students and are driving through a lot of that literature. But I come to it with a certain perspective, and so I want to just make this a gentle first draft hunch about something we might want to pay attention to. So I don't want to say it's a hardly addressed problem. I just want to talk about the problem. I call it the semiotic grounding problem. It parallels a bunch of other grounding problems. And let me see if I can do this. I want to suggest that semiotic effort, and I want to emphasize that that's what we're talking about, is effort. Semiotic effort is a distinct kind of work emergent within nothing but biophysical chemical work. And the question I want to pose to us is how does and how should our research scientifically ground biosemiotics in physiochemical work? And for this, I find two concepts of Peirce's very important. And these concepts, like so many of Peirce's concepts, are open for interpretation. This is my interpretation this week. Synechism, I would argue, is a metaphysics of ontological continuity with emergent differences. It's not saying that everything's the same or that everything blurs into everything else, but I think of it as a kind of anti-parallelism or a constraint on dual aspect analysis, and I'll say more about that in a bit. The other term, of course, prescinding, which I'm going to describe here as analyzing functional features without forgetting that their function is context dependent, not treating features as functional modules independent of the system within which they're embedded or which they're part. I would argue that prescinding inoculates against a very strong human bias, which I'll call the abstract engineering bias. And a lot of this is about trying to address something I'll call the abstract engineering method. I think of it as like back of the envelope first approximation description. So you see on the back of this envelope here how cars work. There's a sitting thingy, a mover thingy, some roller thingies, and there's an arrow between each of them connecting them up. We assume that these boxes are dual aspect. That is, they're both material, they're physical, and they're functional. And we treat them like modules. And if we were doing real engineering, for us to bring a product to fruition, we would have to unpack those black boxes. What is the mover thingy? But if we're doing theoretical work or abstract work, we don't necessarily have to unpack those black boxes. And we do this kind of work through prose, equations, computer simulations, diagrams. They can be extremely complicated, these engineered models, these abstract engineered models. But I'm saying the black boxes remain abstract and unpacked. And interesting to me, the black arrows, by which I mean they're not specified what exactly is going on with them. That's what I mean by black arrows. Everybody knows the concept of black boxes, I'm guessing. But black arrows are ambiguously correlational. That is, their kind of formal cause.
Jeremy.
Yes.
Sorry, just in case, you have not shared your slides yet.
Oh, for crying out loud. How can that be? What a pity. Okay, I'm starting over again. No, I'm not. Just a second. How nice of you to tell me, because I could have gotten through the whole thing. It was, okay, just a second. I'm going back because they're really good slides. I worked all night on them. Here we go. This was the original slide. Semiotic effort is a distinct kind of work emerging within nothing but physiochemical work. Synechism, prescinding. Are we almost all caught up? Here we go. Here's my model. Here we go. We're back to here. Black boxes are ambiguously correlational, causal, or intentional. Thank you, Israel, for that. I appreciate it. Yes, I'm trying to figure out how exactly to describe this tendency. It's a very natural human tendency to use this abstract engineering method because we have extraordinary facility with language and tool making. So we're likely to work with nouns and verbs and think in terms of tool making. How would we design something that functioned in the way that this thing worked? I would say it's a product of everyday intuitive abduction. That would take more to unpack, but it's kind of like blind men's elephant parts. That is, you get the impression that there's this thing in there and you describe a feature of it, and it tends to be more whatist than howist. That is, it's more about describing the kinds of things there are than how they came to be. And they tend to be static descriptive snapshots. Where degradation and work are neglected. And that's kind of the heart of the work, especially from Terry's perspective. I mean, just watching what he does, he's trying to pay attention to the fact that these boxes and arrows, they're degenerating all the time, like everything is. Second law of thermodynamics. In the sociology of this abstract engineering method, the models are promulgated almost like laws. I hereby declare that this is how this should be regarded. That's very popular in philosophy. And the models proliferate without a clear standard for judging better from worse. Now, let me see if, I've already proven my technological incompetence, but let me see if I can play this short video that I made a few years ago talking about the limitations of the engineering method. Let's see if this works.
There is no sound.
Very weak sound.
It's not hearable, right?
Let me see if I can turn this up.
I think when
It's I don't think it's
yeah, sorry, you're not getting much sound, is that right?
Yeah.
There's no sound, and I think it's not the level.
Never mind. I will, what I'll do is I'll send a link for it. It's much better anyway, that way, and I'd like to leave more time for question. I never figured out how to,
You
okay.
just need to share, when you share screen, select share with sound option. You can just
Let's see, where would I do that?
stop,
you
stop sharing.
Oh, I'm showing my age. Let's see, I don't know. I don't,
Go down, Jeremy, down to share screen, the green button.
okay, let's see. So hold on a second. I'm not seeing that.
At the bottom of the screen, you don't see share screen?
I don't have that actually in Zoom at the moment. Maybe that's because, never mind. Actually, I don't want to lose the train of thought. I will share the video. It's worth seeing. It's 4 minutes long. One of my better productions. So let's see. Let's see, this may come up. No, okay. I'm just going to move on. No, hold on. Let's see. I want to suggest that biosemiotics is perfectly positioned to lead a paradigm shift away from abstract engineering explanations. And I want to argue that they're not explanations, that they're snapshots, they're back of the envelope first approximations, but only if we stop relying on the abstract engineering method. That's my claim here, is that you couldn't find a better topic for addressing this problem, which I see as a problem, abstract engineering method, but only if we stop relying on it. And I want to suggest that we are still relying on it. We have, biosemiotics has made some revolutionary, important, key breakthroughs. And yet I would still say that much of the work I read or see ends up being a version of the abstract engineering method, or at least tainted by enough of it that it's worth revisiting and reevaluating whether we're using that method, whether we want to be using it. I pulled this as just one random example. I could have pulled any number of examples from the biosemiotic research I've read, but this would be, if you read the promulgations at the beginning of Sharoff and Tonnisson's new book, Semiotic Agency, it says to naturalize semiotics, we use the following principles, and then it simply lays out some declared, a sign will be this thing for some agent. I want to pick up on the next page, there's an example here of it. The fourth one is use a combination of mechanistic and semiotic analysis, which complement each other. I get it, but I would still say that's a kind of parallelism. You find a material mechanism, you describe the parts of it in this dual aspect way. That is, you're saying it's a mechanism, but you're also saying it's got this semiotic feature. And I'm trying to figure out how we would move beyond that, because I don't think that gets us farther than description. And I would even suggest that it makes our work seem even less palatable to biologists than addressing semiotics. They don't want to address semiotics for a number of reasons. They are dealing with the same challenge, I would say, biologists are, this dual aspect abstract engineering approach. But on top of that, if you're just going to be renaming parts that they already think they've figured out, it makes the biological community less receptive to the work that biosemioticians are doing. There have been throughout recent history, not that recent, grounding problems, where people recognize that they've been doing this abstract engineering method, and they remember that they have to ground it in physics. And so here are some examples of them. Cartesian parallelism, how to raise cogitans and raise extensa connect, Chomsky's language learning problem. Harned came up with the term symbol grounding problem. If symbols are merely arbitrary abstractions, how do they get grounded in reality? Chalmers' hard problem, how you'd ever get qualia out of the mechanisms of the mind, and Thomas Nagel's mind in cosmos challenge to evolutionary theory. I would argue that in each of these cases, what they ended up employing was an abstract engineering epicycle. That is another abstract engineering module or concept for sidestepping the various grounding problems they came up with. So Descartes posited a dual aspect pineal gland. Crypto-Cartesianism, the cognitive scientists are engaged in what I'd call crypto-Cartesianism, where they posit variations on analytic geometry for instantiating res cogitans software, that is immaterial algorithmic idealizations, on res extensa hardware, non-degenerative material mechanisms. So if you're thinking of the mind as software played out on hardware, and given that computers are designed to be non-degenerative, to not degenerate, you're actually engaged in a kind of Cartesianism, even if you reject Cartesianism. Chomsky posited the grammar module. That's a classic example of a abstract engineering epicycle. He just posits a module. Yes, it's made of meat, but it also functions as this grammar module, so it's dual aspect. So I'm saying that that's not sufficient, but there's another way around it. I want to say the elephant is the room. By everyday abduction, researchers identify necessary conditions for semiosis, like the blind man's elephant features. But without a grounding, what's missing is the essence of elephant. That is, what is it that makes semiotic effort, a different kind of work, emerge within nothing but physiochemical work? And we often posit that evolution, for lack of a clear answer to that, we often suggest that evolution initiates semiosis. It doesn't. Semiosis is what evolves. It's not you can't say that evolution starts by, you get my point. I want to argue that evolution isn't some new law imposed on the universe and suddenly life and semiosis starts. So I am boldly, brashly, arrogantly suggesting that there may be room for a neo-synechism, and I'm making some first stabs at it. Neosinicism, I would start with a couple of precepts. I would say that semiotics is poorly named. It's not the study of signs, but of beings making functional, interpretive effort. And that's because it takes physical work to regenerate our ever degenerating capacity to interpret signs. My eyes are not durable outdoor photoelectric sensors. I have to regenerate them all day long, and not just them, all parts of my sensory interpretive capacity. At the top of the screen, you'll see what I think needs to be explained and explained from its origins. I think what we're talking about is work that, can you hear me? Yes. Are we okay? What I want to suggest we need to explain is work that works to keep a chemical system working within its work environment. Work that works to keep a system working within its work environment. The first work is effort. The second work is functionality. It's good for, it's normativity. It works to keep a being alive. I'll get back to the word being in a minute. Within its work environment by interpreting its work environment. So beings, I love the word beings because it's a verb and a noun. Beings are busy being beings in their struggle for persistence in our degenerative universe. Last week, someone pointed me to this sculpture that's somewhere in Asia and apparently makes people cry. I think it's because it's very evocative. It's a machine that leaks fluid and is constantly scooping the fluid back into itself. It's just a metaphor. The machine is durable. The machine is not degenerating, but it's a good metaphor for the Red Queen challenge we all have, which is we have to regenerate ourselves at a rate that outpaces our degeneration. The example I always use is that on even your slouchiest day, you have to regenerate 240 billion replacement cells. That's impressive work. And it is semiotic effort. You're not going to be able to interpret anything if you don't keep that work up. So the abstract engineering method, unprescinded, might treat these four functions, these four elements, beings, function, interpretation, and effort, as distinct, or might want to focus on one of them, like just interpretation. I am saying we need to get beyond that. And if we do, we will have greater influence and greater insight. So I want to suggest 9 standards for a Neocynicis methodology, a way to avoid this dual aspect bowling that we tend to do. I start with this Neosinicus maxim, that the ontologically prior sciences must explain the emergence of what the ontologically subsequent sciences assume. That is, we assume beings that make functional interpretive effort, and I have to explain that from chemistry. Not just from, you can say chemistry, and from an understanding of how dynamics work in general. So the way it occurred to me the other day that with a tree of life is rooted in what? We actually want the roots to be understood, how you'd ever get from chemistry to a tree of life. So here are these 9 principles I would suggest, just hints. Sequidisciplinary, not multidisciplinary. Once again, prior sciences must explain what subsequent sciences assume. The abstract engineering method tolerates multidisciplinary metaphor in ways that I would suggest a sequidisciplinary approach constrains. As we really have to think, if we don't apply a sequidisciplinary approach, we will tend to be smuggling in metaphoric application of things we have yet to explain into our efforts to explain them. Our Ramo reasoning, that is from the branching. So I'm pointing to this bullseye area here and saying, this is where we want to focus. This idea just came to us a couple of weeks ago. I was thinking about it. There's a priori reasoning, which I would think of as a kind of deduction, is basically deduction. A posteriori is induction, and a Ramo is abduction. That is, if you really want to understand the nature of a trait, how to categorize traits, it is very helpful to think about where that trait branched off from what preceded it. So I want to suggest that parallelist biosemiotic research would focus more here after the branching, maybe the branching assumed by DNA or by evolution or something like that, and that semiotic research will tend to focus here, simply on how, I meant to have some other words in here. This leap right here is the leap to symbolic competence. So this would be pre-symbolic organisms, and this would be humans. So semiotic research would primarily focus here. So I'm suggesting that there's actually a missing branch. I would say in general, abduction gets underemphasized, and that we have yet to bring rigor to abduction. We do it by everyday standards, casual standards, and that there could even be a third scientific revolution someday where we really brought some rigor to abduction the way that the prior scientific revolutions have brought it to deduction and induction. Here are those terms that I meant to have over there. Ergodynamic explanation. This is probably the most important of these 9 principles for me. explaining semiotic effort as a change in likely work. So the universe is full of work, physical work, things acting on each other. At some point within that physical work, we also get functional interpretive work, which is why we call it effort. Effort is a kind of work. And then there's symbol competent interpretive effort. So I really want to focus our Ramos on how you get this change in likely work, likely physical work. And if we do that, I think we actually have a natural grounding for semiosis. Emergent reductionism. Once we have explained the emergence of semiotic effort from the work that precedes it, we can reduce our explanations to the explained emergent phenomena. And we would have an alternative to reductionism, to both reductionism and abstract engineering. I'm almost done here. Likelification. It's not enough to find a way to describe physical work in functional terms. You know, we could rest contented that because we know that DNA is functional, we have explained how it works. I want to suggest we have to explain how unlikely work became likely. At the beginning of the universe, we were very unlikely. Now we're very likely. How did that change happen? How did we become likely? Of all the things that could happen. Joanna, I don't know if you know the psychologist out of Poland, Joanna, her last name I won't remember at the moment, even though she's a good friend, it's just a long last name. But she and I both came to this when we were working with Terry. Why is there something instead of everything or anything? That is the old question, why is there something instead of nothing? Yeah, it's a good question. But why is there something instead of everything goes, anything goes? How did we end up with this likely work? Oh, that is not what I meant to do. Let's see. I have this pathological tendency to coin terms, and I coined this for inversatility, or you could also call it vice versatility, is versatility within versing. Some phenomena becoming more likely is also alternative phenomena becoming less likely. Inversatility, I would say, has been a key innovation or key source of innovations throughout breakthroughs, you could say, in biosemiotics or in our understanding of life. Darwin says that fit organisms are the product of the non-survival of the unfit. Shannon says that signal is the product of eliminated possibilities. These are all inversatility moves. Boltzmann is the second law is a product of unlikely regularity. Ashby says self-organization is the product of least discordant remainders. That's Terry's word for it, but he's basically talking about a process of elimination. And I think about this in my everyday life, that your to-do list is equal to your to-don't list. It's the inverse of your to-don't list, that your willpower is actually a product of your won't power. If I want to get to things on my to-do list, I have to keep myself from doing things on my to-don't list. It's a kind of deliberation. And since we tend to think in terms of static, solid objects, it's easy to overlook the obvious way that you can have constraints that are not imposed solid objects. Yes, I can't walk through my walls. It's an imposed static constraint, but I also can't get through traffic congestion. And by the way, every time I think of traffic congestion, I think of the Tartu village square, which I visited in the morning before there was traffic, and then in the afternoon when there was traffic. So what I'm saying here is unlikelification via constraints emergent throughout population dynamics, and traffic congestion is a great example of it. It's not a material thing. You could say it's not made of things, it's made through things passing through it slowly. Yet traffic congestion can make once likely paths unlikely. And this is something that Ashby gets at. A self-organizing system spontaneously reduces the number of its potential states. So I would say this is an important hint if we're trying to figure out how degeneration became unlikely and as a result, regeneration became more likely. Narrowing, not arrowing. This relates with abstract engineering. We tend to think in terms of one-dimensional lines or zero-dimensional dots. Yes, in retrospect, a journey can be drawn as more or less a one-dimensional line, but it's actually in a narrowing in prospect. If you're driving from one town to another with the imposed constraints on either side of the road, it's not an arrow, it's a narrowing. And we should keep that in mind. There are many routes from spot A to spot B. I just want to close with this. Eyes on the prize. I really want an Ramos explanation for the emergence of semiotic effort. And I would also suggest that by the abstract engineering standard, the simplest neo-synechist explanation for the emergence of semiotic effort will seem needlessly abstruse. That is, if you are contented with the abstract engineering method, where you simply block out things and draw arrows between them and connect them up and think of them as static systems, any real effort to come up with a Ramos explanation for the emergence of semiotic effort will just seem cumbersome, clunky, unnecessarily cumbersome. That's all I wanted to say. Yes. And I hope I got through in enough time. I haven't been tracking time, but I would love not just questions, but real challenges. Kick the tires on this thing. It's new. I want to present it 2 more times, and I want to refine it in between. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeremy. And yes, so indeed, please, questions, challenges. I think we have some from Olomouc.
No.
Okay.
Let's see, I'm ending slide. Let's see, I'm stopping share. There we go. Hello.
So we have at least, we have one comment. It says random, but unless I'm mistaken, the I can help myself installation. So this leaking machine you showed has already ceased to function a while ago or has been turned off. Yes. And Jonathan has some comments. So please, Jonathan.
Just about the I can't help machine, I check it out. So if we'll just
Wait, I'm having trouble hearing.
Okay, wait, we have one comment here in the room.
Yeah. About the can't help myself machine. The machine indeed is working in order to keep itself working intact because it's leaking and it try to have the liquid inside again and again. But a bit like a biological being, it becomes less and less efficient at time in executing this task. And so it starts to leak too much and his movements start to be slower and slower. And it was finally unplugged in 2021 after a lot of TikTok shitstorm said that let it rest for God's sake or something like this. So, yes, so I think the metaphor is perfect until the
It is perfect. It is perfect. It's right. No, it's my oldest brother's 70th birthday today. I'm thinking about age. So yes. So even if you design a system to be maximally durable, it will wear down with time. And even that doesn't seem to be factored into the abstract engineering method. And I think it's important. I think it's kind of fundamental. If we're not dealing with models that are degenerative, and we simply posit a system that, for example, I saw a Stu Kaufman article recently, when she simply posits that it makes choices. If you're doing that, I don't think you're paying attention to what it's choosing for, which is it's choosing to keep it from not dying, to keep from dying. Machines break down, so do we.
Thank you. And Jonathan, do you want to make your comments?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. When I commented that I had some thoughts, I figured somebody would have beaten me to the punch already, and then I could hang back for a minute. But since you wanted some pushback, I just wrote down some thoughts I was thinking about as you were presenting, and appreciate the talk.
Yeah, go ahead.
Am I okay?
I can hear you. Yeah, everything's good.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I like the topic. It crosses over to things I'm interested in, which is always, more fun to listen to. Just wanted to kind of mention a few things. The semiotics, not the study of signs, that you said, makes sense while you're saying that, and I think that certainly a definition of semiotics that reduces it to simply the study of the sign, that's certainly questionable. I think that makes sense to push back like you're doing. At the same time, it is partly that, and certainly has historically been that. You could say that it began as that, asking like, what is this thing that we're recognizing?
Right.
I mean, even during the medieval period, right? What is the sign? What's the nature of it? I mean, it crosses over to a lot of the questions that you're talking about in the first place, involving ontology and origins of all manner of things. I think that we have to keep that in mind. It partly is the study of the sign, because it's a perplexing question. And in some sense, the semiotic turn is when you realize that there are signs in the first place, right? So I like the won't power.
Actually, can I respond to that piece? I think we have enough time. I just want to say, I agree with you. Obviously, the things we find significant, the differences we find significant, are a huge part of interpretive effort. They can't be overlooked. I probably cartooned too much to say that it is just the theory of signs. I'm trying in a way to call attention to something, but it's a delicate balance, trying to figure out how to call attention, to create some surprisal and some disturbance. I'm actually trying to create a secondness here, and at the same time to do justice to it. I want to say that there aren't signs; there are potential signs, and they include everything. Anything can become a sign. It only is a sign when semiotic effort deals with it. And I don't think that's necessarily very controversial. But if we talk about there are signs, that gets closer to the reification that I'm worried about as a strong tendency that I want to call attention to. Go ahead with your second point. I just wanted to mention that.
Well, I might as well respond to that too, because I think that it touches on a lot of this stuff. The issue is that that whether we answer the question about whether there are signs or not, what is the nature of the sign? Is it something that human beings construct, or that animal agents construct, or are there signs that pre-exist our existence? I mean, how we answer this question will depend upon some of our more deep philosophical, metaphysical commitments and so forth, because the picture will change meaning-wise, whether or not, for instance, I'm always coming from this angle, but from like a theistic angle, if God pre-exists human agents or what have you, then in a sense, the nature of the sign pre-exists us. So that's not something that we can answer by appeal to an external inquiry in a way. We have to kind of volitionally involve ourselves there. So that's something that I really liked John Deely's idea that at least theoretically, semiotics should be free of certain kinds of metaphysical commitments. Whether it's possible entirely or not, I don't know. But this is one of the things that actually I mentioned elsewhere, which is I saw some connection to the push to naturalize semiotics. I know that, a few years ago, one of the Tartu semiotics students, Claudio, wrote his thesis with the aim to naturalize semiotics, arguing that its importance and what's needed to get there and where the gaps are and so forth. But for me, I actually would push back against that. I'd like to think about it and write about it some more. But even the assumption that it needs to be naturalized is an independent metaphysical commitment.
Yeah, good. This is good. I want to square off directly with that. I'm just saying that from my perspective, naturalizing it is essential, and I do not want to speculate beyond the cynicism that I'm basically a Peircean in this respect. That is, I think that there's no getting around the fact that what we interpret as signs is a product of our interpretive effort. That doesn't mean there's no reality out there. That's a separate question. But I am saying that we disagree on this front. You have a different approach, and that's totally fine. But I am actually positing an approach that I think may get underrepresented in the community of people who are talking about this, and that's what this presentation was. It was just an hour.
And that's fine. I mean, and we probably would have better success if we talked about what we're thinking about in terms of what naturalizing means. We probably have a lot of background things that we're thinking about, and there may be less disagreement because I have something really particular in mind. It's my own deal.
Yeah. So this was just my presentation of how I think you should naturalize it. Just that. Nothing more than that.
And this is not really the same thing, but one little last comment. Just something I've been thinking about related to the willpower and the won't power. I totally agree that this is actually a lot of really connected to what my dissertation was, but what you select also involves inherently, unavoidably, the rejection of a lot of other alternatives, right? Like you can't turn right and turn left at the same time, even in just a basic sense. So that won't power. I like that. I thought that was fun, but it makes sense. One thing I've been thinking about, and I just wanted to throw out there for a little robustness, is that in a way to prioritize the positive or the affirmative to the negation is a subsequent move to what's necessary, because in a certain sense, neither one of them can be removed. So like in terms of the negation and the positive, they can't be removed. They're two sides of the same thing. And sometimes the negative can actually be less informative if it's trying to take on its own. For instance, like if I have a whole room full of objects and I'm like, I want you to guess which object I have in mind.
Sure.
And then like I just proceed to tell you all the things it's not. You're going to have to say a whole lot more, and it's going to be way easier to get the wrong answer.
Oh, totally.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so
no, completely. There's our bias towards identifying the product, not the process, not all the things eliminated in the process of elimination, is totally appropriate and efficient. And Alexei Sharov, he pointed out, look, it's not like one is better than the other, but I would suggest that the negative is going to be essential to understanding how we constrain the chemical tendency to degenerate. That is, you really got to pay attention to how the negative comes into being, and that's why my focus is on emergent constraints as an interesting way that happens. I'm certainly not saying that life boils down to self-organization or traffic congestion, but it's a nice, useful insight. By the way, I don't write much academically. I mostly write for Psychology Today. I've written 1,000 blog articles there. I'm in the business of trying to make complicated ideas simpler. I mean, for example, here's my most recent biosemiotics tome. It's truly biosemiotics. What's up with assholes? No, but it's meant to be readable by blue collar workers. A lot of what I focus on is the kind of tough judgment calls we have about whether to turn right or turn left. A lot of my work is on doubt. It's on secondnesses. So anyway.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So yeah.
Thank you. We have a question by Josh has his digital hand raised, so I would.
Good, Josh. Good to see you.
Hey, Jeremy, how's it going?
Good.
Well, you and I have had a lot of these conversations a number of times. So I'll just respond. I think maybe what you're looking for is maybe a little critique on, I think the general intent of your talk is a critique of a discipline approach. And I think that those critiques are very helpful for sure. But it's interesting now that I've been delving a lot more into the semiotics. I'm finding that because I'm very comfortable with work, as you know, and the danger is that, similar to some of the comments you guys were having before, is that like just the other day, I was reading a paper on modeling ant behavior and how it is they build their openings, and they used a mathematical model in order to describe how it is the geometry of the opening was formed, and it was a dynamical model. But the model was algorithmic and used randomness. So, and the model, like, so to speak, worked, right? This mathematical model, you know, put into a computer, produced a very similar shape to what ants actually produce in the wild. Well, the problem, and that's all fine, and you can learn stuff from that. But the problem is that they took the randomness that they put into their model and the algorithms, and then they impose that into what it is they figured they a priori they assumed the ant was doing. In other words, they just asserted that the ant was making decisions randomly, which of course is sort of the whole heart of semiotics. Is I would suggest a good portion of semiotics is arguing against that case. And so in that sense, science isn't science or work or a lot of those things you're talking about in your talk, I don't think are actually underrepresented. I think they're in some ways overrepresented. And in a lot of ways, they have their own baggage about, you know, self-organization. We've talked with the Peirce, you know, tons about how self-organization isn't enough. I mean, that's part of, you know, the core tenet of Terry's work.
Yeah.
And so I think that the discourse with the back of napkins, the back and forth with the back of napkin folks and the people doing the science, it's just about having the conversations.
I want to be clear. I want to say that a lot of the people doing the science, when it's not actually, a lot of science is a kind of reverse engineering. And what I would have shown in that video, if I had some technological competence, was that it is brilliant, that kind of abstract engineering method. It is essential to our work, and scientists use it a lot. And it's not enough to explain what we're dealing with. It gets too close to alchemy, where you're trying out different things, you're making up models, but you don't really know what you're working with. So I deal with this in psychology. You know, most of this is inspired by watching how psychologists work. I go to psych conferences, I ask top level people what motivation is, and they can't tell you. They don't know what it is. They know what it does. It causes behaviors. And they model it in the abstract engineering method. It's very useful for first approximation descriptions. If we want to get beyond that, I'm suggesting we need some other method. So it's not, I don't want to confuse. I said, if we want to have more appeal to the biologists, with biosemiotics, yes, that's true. But I also want to say that a lot of biologists are still using the abstract engineering method. I would say a lot of philosophy is using the abstract engineering method. It comes naturally to us. It's not bad. It's just closer to everyday abduction that I think will work. And I think if we want to get beyond everyday abduction, elephant parts, we have to look for the essence, and that would be found at the branch where the work changes. I don't know.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I would just suggest that the philosophers are doing probably a bit better job of pulling you know, the wool from our eyes, so to speak, than even the scientists. You know, when you talk about, you know, work is a very complex and necessarily philosophical question. It should be a more philosophical question, I guess, is my point. And it would just be really interesting in your talk if you went from this sort of critiquing starting point, which I think is great, but then move through like maybe some of the philosophers or semiotics, you know, literature where they're like, you know, they're challenging the machine metaphor, for example. I think that would be a really illustrative.
Right. No, That's right. I read a philosophical article sent to me by Augie the other day about challenging the mechanistic model, but it too was a classic example of abstract engineering method. That is, he's positing an alternative model. And this struck me when I was at the Russia Biosemiotic conference, that we can proliferate these models. It makes for good conversations, but I don't think we have a standard very clear on which models are going to be better. Because I don't think we have a sufficient standard. And therefore, in a way, I'm talking about a bridge between them. I'm certainly not talking about which science is better. Who the heck am I to say which approach is better? I'm just saying, here's another approach that may bring a little rigor to abduction, how we categorize things, how we think of these modules after the first approximation.
Well, just one last, I'll just say one last thing, like abduction. If you spend a third of your talk just trying to get people to truly understand or just even partially understand abduction, I think that would be half your battle right there.
Right. There's a new academic book about abduction, and I don't think it does a great job of defining it. And you, as you know, I go with Terry's version of it. It was basically the inversion of the syllogism it's basically how we categorize by attributes in common. But others simply call it hypothesis. And the other day I was talking to Terry about this. He says, no, really, it's not hypothesis exclusively. There are inductive hypotheses and there are abductive hypotheses. So yeah, trying to get clear on what abduction is. And I actually think it's a much simpler and less abstruse concept than it's often touted. I mean, that book was long and I was just amazed at how they defined it as broadly as hypothesis. So anyway, yes, thank you. And by the way, an exchange with you after this would be useful, because I really would like to refine my slides, and I think you have some insights on how to do it.
Yeah, sure.
Someone else? Anybody else? Yeah,
Yes,
a couple more minutes.
Ivan has also.
Yeah.
Ivan, it's so good to see you.
Good to see you, Jerry. So I really enjoyed your presentation. The only kind of thing that bothers me here is, can we call this neo-synechism? Because actually, you seem to do it like a halfway. You prioritize like materials level and then you ground everything in it. And this makes total sense. But
yes,
from how I usually see Peirce's synechist project, it doesn't prioritize just one thing. It is about continuity, but you kind of move only in one direction. So do you ever consider how we can move in other direction from like from thought to matter? Is there any kind of rules of how we build consequences in that direction?
Yes. This last week, I've been rereading the selected writings of Peirce, and finding places where I diverge from it, and therefore may not be entitled to use the term synechist. By the way, it's pretentious of me to suggest anything like Neocynicism. I just want to say, I coin words. So that came to mind as a kind of branding for this idea. It is synechist in the fundamental sense. That is, it's an argument from continuity, that there's continuity and discrepancy and differences. I think Peirce, given his era, given his interest in not psychologizing, given a phenomenological bent, was more inclined to think in the direction you're suggesting than I am. That is, I really don't think, I mean, obviously thoughts change behavior. It's why, though Santa Claus is not real, the idea of Santa Claus is real because it changes actual physical phenomena. So I certainly see that, but I am squaring off against the approach that wants to see it as two-way. I think that matter emerged before matter was here before mattering. It's based on the hunch that, from 10 plus billion years of history, we find nothing so far, at least in this neighborhood, this neck of the universe, that can't be explained in the first 2/3 of that time, that can't be explained as physical work. then I have to explain interpretation as emergent from it. It's just the approach I take. Whether we call that synechist or not, I don't, it's not mine to say.
Thank you.
Anybody
Very
else?
good.
We have 3 more minutes. Really kick the
Indeed.
tires here.
Indeed. We have some more, just maybe a short question or some remark.
Or a remark that I don't get to respond to.
Well, if no one else is willing to, then maybe I will make a small remark just about this inversatility.
Yes.
Yeah, and this idea that some phenomena become more likely is also that some phenomena are becoming more
Yes.
unlikely. And I was reminded about so Luis Prieto. Well, I'm just doing work on his theory, and he, in one of his books, he proposes to change the sort of the definition of extension and comprehension of a class, and he says that by defining the extension of a class, well, he wants to not to define the extension of the class as such, but he says that when you delimit a class, what you do is that rather you focus on the elements that do not belong to the class. So by extension, he wants to understand the complement of the class, yes, but not the extension of the class itself. And now he's doing this in phonology, but and I think it would be sort of interesting also because in biosemiotics we are often dealing with not necessarily with other more classic semiotic theories that might still you know, contribute something like linguistic theories or just Saussurean, like good old Saussurean semiology. So yes, that was my remark.
Good. No, it's useful. So before we close, I want to also say I will be representing along these lines in a week at the Glade. So I hope that I have planted a seed that will make you come back all the more aggressively with me when I represent next week. Anybody who happens to be going to both presentations, because I really want to kick the tires on this method. So if any thoughts come to you between now and then, load them up and lay them on me when we get together. Thank you all.
Thank you. And so